And then his point was, I don't understand why we're getting so much hate. Look at all the good we did for peasants in Mexico, which is a little bit of a weird thing to say when you trick American voters into voting something. And then after the fact, you say, sure, it may have made some of you worse off in Ohio and Michigan, but look at all the good.
It's good for the other country.
that we did in Nayarit.
So let me ask your view. Assume, for the sake of argument, that the objective is to benefit Americans in the United States, to benefit jobs, to benefit their economic welfare, to make their lives better. In your view, what would be the optimum immigration and or trade regime that would maximize the economic condition for Americans?
Well, first of all, it's a great question. I have to show that there's nothing xenophobic about this. So I've written a paper called Migration for the Benefit of All, peer-reviewed economic paper about how you can open a border ethically by using co-sean immigration. That is, most Americans' most valuable possession is actually asymmetric access to their labor market. And we don't realize that is actually the source of our wealth. Now, again...
But could you, if you wouldn't mind, put that in layman's terms.
Sure. You have the right to your own labor market, given that your country maintains a right to conscript you, to tax you.
Yes.
Part of the social contract is that you get a share in your country's wealth through having a right. Now, the interesting part about it is if we can just get your right declared red tape or an impediment to the free market, then I can take your right without having to pay you anything for it. Now, this is, in fact, a violation of free market economics. So
let me ask, what does it mean to have a right to a market? I understand.
You have something called labor certification. So when you have labor certification, you have to go through a certain amount of
So a high-tech worker to come in, there has to be a certification that there are not U.S. workers to fill that need.
Yes, and in fact, we should not make labor certification easy, because part of what forces us to renew is putting our businesses under pressure. So one of the things that I find very interesting, so I'm now going to say something pro-right after I've been anti-right.
Yes, because just for those who are struggling to catch up as I am, you've just come out and criticized the Reagan era. You've built up your left-wing bona fides.
Clear, he's criticized the Reagan era for too much big government.
Right.
Which I'm actually perfectly fine with that criticism of.
And then, Eric, you've gone back and attacked the left or at least I suppose we would call it the modern left, for its open borders or advocacy of high-skill immigration.
It didn't advocate for high-skilled immigration. It lied. Effectively, what you did is you got the National Science Foundation and the National Academy of Sciences to stab American scientists in the back on behalf of scientific employers. And so all of the sloppy talk about best and brightest, so
if Tim Cook were sitting here, Tim Cook would argue that they need access to Chinese and Indian engineers and computer scientists.
Tim Cook would never sit here if I'm on set.
Let's imagine the hypothetical, or tell me why.
You would have to chain him to a radiator, or you would have to wheel him in the way Hannibal...
We have those tools in this podcast.
That's true. That's part of our Hollywood setup here.
No, but it's very important. It's one of the reasons why people won't invite me to talk about... I mean, there is essentially no one at my level that I know of who's openly against high-skilled immigration as the worst part of our immigration
Yes, this
policy.
Has struck me as a position you can't say. You can say it on things like podcasts, which is why I think you have a successful podcast and why people listen to this show too.
And let's segue. This is fascinating, but I don't want to miss a major portion of this topic, which is and I told you we'd get back to this. You made reference to the modern left, to some or even many becoming Maoist.
Yes.
And for the listeners, I think I know what you mean, but tell us what you mean by that.
Well, you have a very weird coupling on the technical left. So with Dick Morris and Bill Clinton effectively becoming a second Republican Party, you then had a problem which is, how do I replace organized labor as a voting bloc? And my wife, Pia Milani's great insight here was, she's an economist with the Institute for New Economic Thinking, a Soros-funded institute.
Now we've got the left-wing bona fides again. All right, I'm reoriented.
Her point was that you need something cheaper than labor because labor makes economic demand. So there's always a search for who's willing to accept the least. And the thing that you can actually get voters with for people who are willing to accept very little has been identity politics. So the idea is that identity politics is the electoral substitute for organized labor that was lost after Bill Clinton and Dick Morris decided that you had to have two Republican parties in order to not have more than 12 years of continuous one-party rule.
And one sees memos going around the internet, for instance, from mega corporations that actually show executives at some major corporations have relied on identity politics to divide up labor in the hopes that they wouldn't unionize.
So